I thought we didn't want him to participate.
There's a situation that occurs where Mr. Staples says some things, I think it's outlined.
Don't even.
That he makes.
Let him make.
I
am. He's doing a good job.
He's sitting next to Ms. Brunel. He's instructed at that time, you need to be quiet. You need to not, disturb the meeting. And he's not arrested. Sergeant DeLuca walks away. Several minutes thereafter, in response to some things that are being said on the stage, I believe the video and audio will make it clear that he says, shut it down. And I will tell you that it's the state's position that not only does he say that in a way that can be heard, but that's essentially his rallying cry. That's the sort of thing that he says. That's what he said in other settings. He says, shut it down. It's essentially, he's like the man with the savant throwing it into the machine. He wants to close the meeting down. He wants to close the process down. So that's his telltale phrase. When he does that, the state police at that point are preparing to go in and arrest him, but simultaneous with that, he turns to some people around him and they make a decision. They're going to stand up, they're going to turn their backs, they're going to raise the sign. That's what the court was the beginning of what the court saw. What I will indicate to the court is a decision to approach Mr. Staples and I think just Mr. Staples at that point. Just approach Mr. Staples and arrest him was made. They didn't go ahead and do that because the people stood up and turned their backs on the rest. I think the decision is made. We don't want to sort of push by people to get a hold of him and bring them out. We don't want to create a disturbance ourselves. They then turned around and sit down. You saw that. And what I want the court to understand is that right after they sit down, there are some people who are sort of standing up and blocking, but you could see some with their arms in the air for a brief period of time when the arms come down. And then shortly after that, the two state troopers, Sergeant Vince Rico and Sergeant DeLuca of the state police walk in and they identify and remove Mr. Staples and Ms. Brunel. And they identify them and remove them because, as I said, Mr. Staples had already done something which the state can't understand.
Mr. Reese,
she raised her hand.
I know that's not object to that.
She raises her arm and says, amen.
She was assaulted by the other bailiff and someone called the cops on her. She's doing that.
Not something we should do. And which is occurring after she had been essentially warned because she's sitting right next to Mr. Staples when Sergeant DeLuca goes in and says, you need to, remain quiet and get disturb the meeting. The other thing that happens in the interim too is at one point in time, Sergeant Megan Walsh of the New Hampshire State Police is able to speak to the crowd and is able to say to them, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you being here, but you need to understand if you engage in conduct that disrupts this meeting, you will be arrested. Again, that is on the video, and you'll be able to hear it. You see it from behind. She sort of walks out into that open area, facing the crowd, and she addresses them, and that's what she says. So we're saying with respect to Mr. Staples and Ms. Brunel, there was an individualized warning, and I tell you there was an individualized warning because in terms of preparing for the situation, the state police were aware that Mr. Staples and Ms. Brunel were participants in two earlier settings where there were problems. So they went up to them and said, look, you're in here, you're allowed to be here, you need to be quiet, you need to behave yourself, or else you'll get arrested.
Liar.
So even though the argument with respect to Ms. Brunel may be, hey, this is a fairly low threshold, she didn't really do it. She's doing so in the context of having received essentially a warning, a general warning, and having a bit of a prior history. So they're asked to get up and to leave. They go outside, they're behind this curtain, and then, as counsel indicated, that's I forget the word he used, but the state, it started. It wasn't just a starting response. That was essentially a statement from her, along with Mr. Staples, if you can hear him very clearly. Shut it down again. Whatever, this is all fucked up. We're being arrested. They're notifying the people inside that the police have come and taken them, didn't announce to them, you're being arrested. Waited till they got them behind and said, turn around, put your hands behind your back, you're being arrested. And that's when they speak in a way that can be heard by the folks on the other side of the barrier. And that's when, quite frankly, over the next few minutes, a lot of things happen very quickly. A lot of the supporters we would submit get upset, start yelling, start saying to the police, and the situation turns into one where ultimately there's a break for a period of time, then they try to conduct the meeting again, then there's a break again, going back and forth, and also ultimately during that period of time, the state would submit with respect to Mr. Albert Todd and with respect to Ms. Boussier Appleton. There was physical resistance on the part of those individuals.
Tyrants.
To the notion that they were going to be arrested. So this is a sort of volatile situation where the governor and council have expanded the meeting space for people to participate. And then they want the state police to be there to make sure that they can have a meeting and complete business. And ultimately, based upon Mr. Staples and Mr. Grinnell, behavior gets out of control, and for a brief period of time, it's a little bit problematic in terms of what's going to occur. Ultimately, order is restored, the meeting is completed, and finished. So, with respect to the arguments, the first thing I will say about the duplicitous argument is the defense seems to be conceding that there are certainly cases in New Hampshire law that suggest, whether it be a murder trial or whatever, that the state can elect different mental states within even the same type of charge. But that we should not be allowed to do that with respect to a disorderly conduct charge. I don't believe they cite any law that supports that proposition, and our position is no, the court could make a finding that either it was clearly Mr. Staples, let's take him for example, his intent to purposely disrupt this meeting, or that his behavior was reckless with respect to creating the risk that that would happen. And certainly with respect to being on the other side of the curtain and yelling and doing all the rest. Our position is this was clearly his intent as a sort of call to arms to the people who are like-minded to him. But that's what that's what the court to decide. Our position, which is consistent with theirs, is they can't be punished twice for the same alleged violation of a statute. But they can be charged twice based upon the mental state and leave it to the court to make that decision. With respect to the issue of the video, as I understand Attorney Yen's argument, he seems to be saying that the video should be the exclusive testimony or the exclusive evidence of what occurred and what didn't occur, and the court should make a ruling on it. We disagree. Our position is the video captures what occurred. At one point in time, I believe Attorney Stanton by the time it was being said, we have a reason to believe that there were other cameras in that building and other cameras that may have recorded what was going on. And in consistent with my obligations, I contacted folks, I got in touch with police standards of training, and my understanding is the other cameras are cameras that are essentially real-time cameras that don't record, that are in that building for security reasons, but they're not recording. The camera that gives us the view is a camera which is set up, which I guess is in place for all governor and council meetings. It's set up on the stage, and that's why you have the view that you have. My intent in responding to the request for bill of particulars, yes, to what's going on, was to say, we believe the evidence of what's going on is essentially captured on this video. You can see the various actors and what's happening. And we think, to a great extent, if you watch the full video, the court will have a full and fair understanding. But with respect to where the video is and whether or not you can pick up on audio everything that is being said, as opposed to having it supplemented by the testimony of the troopers who were there and available, we think that that's not, we don't do trial based on just a video. There's some live people. It would be as if to say, like in a drug sale case, hey, there was a camera down the street and saw what happened, so that should be what controls. No, we expect there to be, I approach the person, this is what happened, this was the transaction, and then if it's inconsistent with what's on the video, obviously the court can take that and understand that and sort of read that through its analysis. With respect to the lack of probable cause, as I indicated, with respect to Ms. Grinnell, although it's a little distant, you could see her raise the arms, and what we would say is that what she does at that point, and what the trooper would testify to is, she said, amen, and then put her arms down because she was agreeing with, I believe, as I said, this Executive Council Gatsas about whether certain contracts should be approved, the way they should be approved, and that was after she was given a warning, general and specific. You can't do this or else you're going to get arrested. So, although I would agree on some level with the defense's position about generally the right to hey, look, you want to petition your government for redress of grievance, you should be able to say something. Time, place, manner. This is not the time or the place for them. You're there to observe, you're there to take notes, you're there to get copies of documents, and you're then able to go wherever you want to go, speak to whoever you want about your disagreement with these policies. What you're not allowed to do is to interrupt the meeting by any means. And even if that would appear on some people's radar as being inconvenience, like, hey, people in church say amen. Why is amen now prohibited here? Again, it's contextualized. We're talking about the state police being in a very specific position to want to control this environment so this meeting can be completed. And they have to make judgment calls, but if they see something after a specific admonition to someone that is inconsistent with what they told them, they make a decision to arrest. Then when she's behind the curtain and she does what she does, what our position is what she did was not consistent with alarm or being startled. Let's just take the comments. They got me out here, they put me out here, so asked me to turn around. Now I want the people inside to know we're being arrested. If you were inquiring just generally, what's going on? Being arrested. You would hear it. When you can hear it on the audio feed, on the camera that's set up on the stage, all the way through that audience, it's consistent with, she didn't say at regular volume, she said it in the volume so people inside could hear.
Public has a right to know.
She did that to alarm them, to disturb them. The last point, I think this goes into the First Amendment issue, and it goes into the reliance by the defense on Mario. We think that the case that the court should look at is the Coleman case. That is cited by them, and it's cited by me for different reasons. Coleman is a very sort of similar situation, as a matter of fact. It's the former governor, father of the current governor, during his inauguration, someone who didn't like, I guess, the Seabrook power plant and certain things having to do with nuclear energy, sort of tricked their way into the hall where there was going to be inauguration, had false press tags or whatever, and at some point in time it's discovered, like, this guy shouldn't be here. And as they approach him, he charges the stage, he starts yelling out all the rest, and he's arrested. I would say, on some levels, that function in an operation is a ceremonial proceeding. What was happening at the police standards of training, we would suggest is actually more core to the function of the government, which is the governor council meeting to discuss and approve of contracts and nominations and things of that nature. But nevertheless, they're both important proceedings, they both have legal and sort of ceremonial significance. And you can't go there to disturb them. You can go there to observe them and to become informed.